Welcome to Not My Generation. I am Professor James Davenport. This is my marvelous colleague, Dr. Emily Stacey. And there is a whole bunch of stuff going on right here in Oklahoma this week. And we're going to take two topics that we think are the most significant, most important as far as what's going on politically, and discuss those. We're going to start off with talking about redistricting. And specifically, we're going to be looking at congressional redistricting. And for those who don't know, every 10 years, we do a census. We take that data, how many people live where, whatnot, and then the state governments are responsible for drawing the boundaries of the congressional districts in those states. And so Oklahoma's been going through that process, and you want to kind of help us walk through that?
Yeah, so I got the pleasure of living through the redistricting process the last time we did this in 2012, directly after the 2010 census. So I was at the state capitol as a reporter, so I got to know the process pretty intimately, and that was, as you remember, a pretty contentious year. It ended with the Democrats in the state taking the new maps to the state Supreme Court and losing.
And losing, that's right.
They did try, though, and I would expect for probably something similar to end kind of this as well. So the special session began this week, and it was solely focused on redistricting. And so in Oklahoma, like a lot of other states, redistricting is a committee process. And that's really important to understand, right? So whenever you vote in those midterm elections, please, because you are looking for your party to take the majority of seats in the legislative process so that they get to control really important processes such as redistricting, right? So this process, again, committee process. So if it's a 10-person committee, the majority of those members are going to be from the majority party, which of course in Oklahoma, in both chambers, is going to be the Republican Party. So you have the Democratic Party already crying foul, right? They started crying foul in May.
And to be fair, if it was reversed, it would be the same thing on the other
Absolutely,
side,
right? Absolutely.
Yes.
So as a matter of just process, the Senate Select Committee on Redistricting, and the House follows the same rules, notes that it will strive for a transparent process and want to make recommendations, or want the public to be involved in making recommendations. So they did host 30 town halls across the state. Very interestingly, I'll point out, they did so before the proposed maps came out.
Right.
So that was a little kind of stick in the mud there, right? We want it to be an open process, but you don't get to see what the openness and transparency is about. So
we want to hear from you before we show you what we're going to do, not after.
That. and I'll read you some of the more curious public comments that came from those, because it was pretty clear that the people didn't know what they were trying to do. They put out their own kind of suggestions and requests, but again, they were working from the old census data, things like that, right? Projections, estimates, things like that, until the actual numbers came out, right? Which is why, again, we had to delay redistricting until later in the year, because the 2020 census report was delayed.
Right.
Yeah. So the special session began this past Monday on November 15th. The Monday was used as a procedural day, so reading in the bills, introducing the bills, getting them into first reading. So again, just a bunch of procedural stuff. Tuesday was the committee work, right? So you have the Senate Redistricting Committee and the House Redistricting Committee meet and approve the legislation pretty quickly. So you have the chair of the Senate Committee, Lonnie Paxton, Republican from Tuttle, and then you have Chairman Ryan Martinez, Republican from Edmond. Both obviously running their committees pretty adeptly, and they got those votes through, right? So they first voted out of committee on Tuesday. So of course then that goes to the floors. So the House advanced the new congressional district maps without Democratic approval. There was a pretty big debate that went on the House floor for a while. So again, the House Democrats accused the Republicans of intentionally redrawing Congressional District 5, which Professor Davenport is going to detail momentarily, which includes, or did include, much of urban Oklahoma City to be redrawn into Congressional District 3. So we want to, what the Republicans have proposed and what has passed now is that Again, Congressional District 5 will now include parts of Canadian, Logan, and Lincoln County areas, which skew heavily Republican, while also keeping Potawatomi and Seminole counties within Congressional District 5, which again skews Republican. Interestingly, I got some numbers from 538.com, right, Nate Silver and that fun crew. So the new map, and they really interesting. So they're just working from the proposal, but the new map, he said, would make the partisan lean go from plus 11 Republican to plus 24.
That's
Republican.
pretty solid.
That's a solid lead by shedding, again, the heavily Democratic parts of South Oklahoma City and moving those to Congressional District 3. So the Democrats aren't necessarily wrong. So again, according to research, there's roughly 181,000 residents of Oklahoma County, many of whom are Hispanic voters, will now be included in Congressional District 3, making it very difficult, I would think, for a Democrat to win Congressional District 5 by carrying those minority votes that are, extremely important. So the final maps will get approval theoretically later today. So you have, again, the public meetings and all of that good stuff. So I wanted to read just a couple of those public comments. And mind you, the House did advance the maps 75 to 19. So again, you have an overwhelming majority of Republicans in. So I would think that that was all of the Democrats voting no, and maybe a few that were missing. So still very strong margin for the map's approval. So again, the public comments were coming from a place of not a whole lot of data and certainly no maps drawn up yet. So you have a Western Oklahoma resident, I won't use names here, suggested all of Oklahoma County be put into CD5 rather than breaking it up for CD4 to have some. Another OKC resident and chair of the Oklahoma County Democratic Party says, keep Oklahoma County cohesive all together if possible. A lot of the more interesting ones point out the fact that the legislature, both I think Republican and Democrat, really strive to keep Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill together in a voting block, which is really interesting and has been reiterated through a lot of these public comments as well. So just a really interesting, again, redistricting is always fireworks. You're always going to have one party who is alleging that they're losing party influence statewide. And of course, based on the Supreme Court ruling in 1986-7, that's what gerrymandering is, right? So you have to prove, you have to be able to prove that as the minority party that you are losing influence statewide, which I don't know how you do that. How do you do that, Professor Davenport?
Seems to be a pretty high burden, right?
Yeah.
We've had a few, but not many, that we've seen the courts tackle. But normally, and the Supreme Court especially, they have been really hands-off when it comes. It's like this is a political process governed by the state and whatnot, and this is not our job to interfere with it. Right?
Unless it's just egregious, right? You have had a couple of cases in the last few years that have
where they
completely gerrymandered.
Exactly, right. So we're going to throw up some maps for you, and I'll walk you through these. The first one is the congressional districts, by and large, how they are today. All right, and so you can see that too.
Yes.
So just so you know, we've got 5 congressional districts in Oklahoma. The 5th congressional district encompasses most of Oklahoma County, as Dr. Stacey said, as well as Potawatomi and Seminole counties. The 4th congressional district runs all the way up into Midwest City, and then all the way south to Lawton, and it is the district that encompasses both Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill. It has been that way as far as I can remember.
Very long time.
That has been kind of a priority when they've drawn these maps. And that does give the representative from that area some clout on military stuff, with having both of those in the district. The 3rd district, which is geographically the largest district today, runs from the Panhandle all the way over to very near Tulsa County, right, or right up to Tulsa County. And then Tulsa County has, with Washington County, makes up the 1st district, and then you've got basically the whole eastern part, a third to a little over a third of the state, which is in the 2nd district. So that's how they are currently. What all the fight is, as Dr. Stacey was telling us, is over what's going on in Oklahoma County specifically, in Oklahoma City. And so currently, again, in Oklahoma County, the 5th district makes up the bulk of it, with only the 4th district coming in, as we said, to encompass, by and large, Tinker Air Force Base, Midwest City. The 3rd district is not in Oklahoma County currently, and we'll look at the map of the proposed map and see how that changes. And the other 2 districts don't come into Oklahoma County at all either. And so the question is, what do you do with that? And this has been a question, quite frankly, that has driven state legislatures in Oklahoma for a long, long time, as we'll see, but that's the question. Now, the proposed map, and we'll just look at the Oklahoma County one, because that's where the most changes are. The proposed map would bring that 3rd district all the way in on the south part of Oklahoma City and Oklahoma County, as far as right up to Del City. And in fact, when I looked at this map, I figured I'm going to be moved into a different congressional district, right? I have been in the 5th congressional district. Now, under this map, I will actually be in the 3rd.
Yeah.
So the question is that a good way of doing this? Well, it depends on what your priorities are. If your priority is maximizing your party's chances of winning, and you're the majority party, this is a good plan, right? If your agenda is to keep communities of similar interest pretty much contained in congressional districts, well, it's hard to see how much I have similar to people who live way out in the panhandle, right? It's not exactly the same. There has been some concern expressed, and I think it's a valid concern. Does that dilute the vote? We were talking about that before we came on. Does that dilute the vote of those predominantly Hispanic voters that live now in that southern portion of Oklahoma City? Does it reduce them by splitting them up, so to speak, taking that out? So that there's that concern as well. So you've got all of this going on. Now, I wanted to give you some historical perspective, only to show 2 things. Number one, that this has been a question that we've dealt with before, right? And we basically keep coming back to the same thing. And I just want to highlight how everybody involved in this are all hypocrites to begin with, all right? So, but this is the plan. I think the concerns about are we minimizing the chances of a Democrat winning the 5th congressional district? That's absolutely the reason to do this, right? And nobody's surprised. I mean, quite frankly, I don't think anybody expected a heavily Republican-controlled legislature not to make these changes to do that, right? The only question was, how were they going to do it, right? So they go to this map. Well, I want to show you a map of Oklahoma County from 1983 to 1992.
The glory days.
Right. Now, remember, at this point in time, Democrats are running the show in this state and are as dominant in the legislature as Republicans are today, by and large, right? And what does that Oklahoma County look like? Well, lo and behold, it looks almost exactly like the plan that the Republicans are proposing today.
No way.
Go figure, right? Now, again, Democrats run the legislature. They felt this was the most beneficial to them in doing it that way, and it had been this way for quite some time. If you go back, so this is actually, I want to make sure I'm giving you right. This is 1983 to 1992, right? The 1993 map is by and large the same. It extends it over a little bit farther east in the county, and so. But that benefited the Democrats at that time. And Republicans were screaming, you can't do this, right? And so in 2002, when they begin redistricting, that's the ones you were talking about, right? And we lose a seat in Congress, which is always kind of a contentious thing, too.
Very.
Republicans said, okay, we're going to do this. And as you mentioned, there were competing maps. The Democrat-controlled legislature had their map, and the governor had their map. And they ended up going to court, and the court sides with the governor's map. My understanding, now I couldn't find a copy of the maps proposed by the Democrats for that time. My understanding is they were going to carve up Oklahoma County pretty significantly too, right? Much more so than what you see today. So it benefits Republicans to do this now, and they're doing it. It benefited Democrats to do it then, they're doing it, and both sides have just traded places, and they want you to ignore what they said before. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I hear this seems like regular, right? Yeah. So now there have been, and Dr. Stacey and I probably have a little bit different perspectives on this, but there have been proposals. What we need is a nonpartisan or bipartisan, commission to do the redistricting. There have been a handful of states that have done that. You know how many? I don't remember right offhand. Maybe 10. I don't know if that many.
Yeah, maybe 7.
And I think the jury's still out on how much better, if at all, that's going to be. We don't know. The idea, though, is to take away the incentive that the legislature has in doing this kind of partisan gerrymandering, right? And my problem with that is at least we know who to blame for the stuff like this at this point, right?
That's fair.
I know who I can point a finger at and say, you did this, I'm not voting for you again.
Right.
If I have some nonpartisan or bipartisan commission, the ability for me as a citizen to hold them accountable is at least one step removed, right? Because the legislature can say, hey, we didn't do this. This isn't, this is the way it works, and we're just adopting what they did. How do I hold them accountable? Well, I've got to vote someone else out who then will appoint someone else new, and there's no guarantee, So for me, as an accountability mechanism, I'm not excited about those nonpartisan commissions. I do think we both agree that a better way of doing this would be something like proportional voting, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe getting rid of these single-member districts, just doing proportional voting,
fabulous.
And something like that. And from my perspective, that would do two things. It would get us out of this kind of gamesmanship over elected officials choosing their voters, right? Which is always the criticism, right?
Yes.
And get it, so to do that, but it would also, I believe, make the House of Representatives a much more reflective body of the population of voters that are out there. Don't you?
Yes. No, the whole key word is representative.
Yes. And I think it just would be great. And you might see some more possibilities of Republicans and Democrats getting elected.
Fringe parties, right? Or what we would refer to as fringe parties.
Exactly.
Now. No, I'm not going to get on my soapbox. I think you people know how I feel about proportional representation. No longer is the two-party system working really for anybody unless you are just fervently liberal or fervently Republican or libertarian, I guess, at the end of the spectrum.
No, conservative.
Okay, conservative. Whatever. It's unfortunate, right? And I think that we are missing a huge advantage in a plurality such as our own, but your politicians don't have any impetus to change the system. They know the political math. They know how it works. They know how to keep getting reelected. And so until we get mad enough, Jamie, and his generation, the Gen Z kids get mad enough to demand third parties and extra, multi-party systems, this is going to continue.
Yes,
right? Unfortunately.
I completely agree. And I think proportional representation is doable. I don't think it's going to be done anytime soon, but it would certainly be doable.
Yeah. And because it's in the interest of the citizen, which is something that we've forgotten what the definition of democracy is.
Citizens.
Unfortunately.
Well, all right, so that's redistricting. It's what's going on. Yes, I think the Democrats, by and large, are correct in their criticism. This was wholly designed to benefit the Republicans in keeping Congressional District 5.
Let's say her name, right? I'm sorry.
No, that's good. No, I think that criticism is spot on. That's why it was done. I just think, for them to be too hypercritical, about this is a little over the top. They can say that. But let's not pretend like you didn't play this game before as well, right?
Agree. Although I will say, when you have a minority leader as young as Emily Virgin, she probably hasn't played
so
this
a little bit of history goes a long way.
Yeah, exactly. You've got some pretty young Democrats
in
the legislative branch at this point.
You have some And I'm not, well, never mind.
Oh, dear.
I'm an old codger. I get it. So I'm just going to leave
He's
it at
going
that.
to shake his
right?
fist at the spy on his lawn later. Kids, you don't
All
need
right.
to see it.
We had another probably more serious thing going on besides redistricting this week, and that was the governor's decision or non-decision to commute the the death sentence for Julius Jones, who was convicted of a murder in Edmond, I think in the 1980s or 90s? Was it the 1990s? Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
And there has been all sorts of controversy over this. Accusations that the trial was not conducted properly. I just heard this week that his co-conspirator or his partner in the crime confessed to actually committing. So you've got all of this stuff going on. You've had lots of people from celebrities around the country, Democrats. You had a group of Republican legislators send a letter to the governor this week asking him to commute this sentence. And then you've had some who are, the district attorney, David Prater, has been staunchly, no, this is the right thing, it needs to go through. So the governor's been back and forth on this. Finally, yesterday, a little more than 4 hours before the sentence was supposed to be carried out, the governor came out and announced that he would, in fact, commute the sentence, right? And you want to pick it up, anything I left out or want to discuss here?
Commuted. You granted clemency, yeah.
Well, yeah. So it's always.
But yeah,
all of this
it's
stuff,
the different C words. But yeah,
I think he used the word somewhere, but I don't remember.
No, you're fine.
But it was a weird commutation, right? It was a weird way of doing it.
Yeah, so this was why I kind of, whenever we were talking about redistricting in the special session, I did specifically talk about Thursday and why your maps are probably going to be made official today rather than yesterday, was because your legislative branch, in an abundance of precaution, shut things down, right? They told non-essential staff to go home around noon yesterday, I want to say. Just anticipation of what the governor was going to do one way or another. You had protests and vigils and all kinds of stuff starting at the Capitol around 8 a.m. yesterday, and that was after folks camped out on the lawn and around the governor's mansion, which has been barricaded off, or was, again, due to this event. And so, I just to parse this a little bit, I think that I think a lot of folks were shocked, and of course you guys know that I'm addicted to Twitter, and so I had been, checking and refreshing, waiting for, whatever was going to happen to occur. And we have students that are extremely involved in this movement. One of our former students, Kyrie Baker, who runs the Black Times, the former Black Times, so they are there on the scene as this stuff is occurring. And so it was very emotionally fraught and very, very high intensity with this case. And one thing that you left out, which I think was just wholly shocking to me, was not only did he get letters from celebrities, etc., but on Wednesday he also received letters from ambassadors. Right, from Belgium and to UN, and from France and Germany. All of these different, the EU, crazy stuff. It's just kind of unheard of, right? This was such a huge case. It was on CBS News this morning, right? It really took the conscience of the entire world, to be quite honest, right? And focusing on Oklahoma, which of course has had botched executions, make international news.
Just recently.
So, and I want to get back to that once we get done talking about what happened yesterday, because there are questions about the future of the death penalty, I think, personally, but we'll get there. We got him granting clemency based on, I'm not really sure, right? We're not sure why Kevin Stitt made this decision.
His announcement did not really give any reason, right?
There was not a great bit of detail or sympathy or, any sort of proverb or, anything that came with that message. And then he also made the point that by granting him this clemency, He is doing so and sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. And that got a lot of folks on Twitter fired up.
Right.
So already, in fact, I follow a lot of reporters who were on the scene in McAllister yesterday, and Graham Brewer, I believe, from the Oklahoman, they had just sat down in the prison right before that message came out. So I mean, that's just how close things were.
Right.
Your media was prepared to watch someone be executed yesterday.
And he had already been going through all of the preparation for the sentence to be carried out.
I can't imagine. Anyway, so yeah, this came down around 1-ish yesterday, and I think there was again a great relief for a lot of folks. You saw the tears.
And to be clear, across the political spectrum, across how people think about the death penalty, this was pretty widespread.
Yeah. I think that the problem with this is that we are now, the older generations are kind of dwindling, if you will, not really dwindling, but the boomer generation will take an answer to that.
I'm not a boomer, so I
you're
can't.
You're not.
I just want to point that out.
I have noticed that the younger generation, regardless of their partisan leaning, have a problem with the idea of state-sanctioned killing, execution, right? I think it is a really interesting political kind of turn of tide, if you will, in the American populace that will eventually lead to maybe the abolition of the death penalty. I mean, you've seen it at state by state, Colorado, for example. And so it's not completely out of the question, especially as your state is not conducting these lethal injections or conducting these executions in, I think, my opinion, and certainly the Pardon and Parole Board's opinion from their meeting on Wednesday, in a constitutional way.
Right. And that goes to, if you're going to enact the death penalty and you're going to carry it out, the courts have set some guidelines about how that needs to happen, right? And one of the things is, now the court has never said, although it has heavily implied in recent decisions, it's never outright said there can be no pain at all involved. But the expectation is that that pain would be minimal.
Objectionably intolerable. That's
exactly.
Quote unquote.
Yes, objectionably intolerable.
Yes.
Right. And so Oklahoma, a few years back, was having problems. Governor Fallon, I believe at that time, put a moratorium.
Yes.
The state was having trouble acquiring so when you use lethal injection, it's not just one type of drug. There's 3 that are used. Each does something different. The state was having trouble acquiring one of those drugs, and I won't go into all the reason why, they were. So they substitute that drug with, is it midazolam? I'm not sure I'm going to say this correctly at all, but midazolam or something like that. And when they begin coming in and doing the death penalty again, you could see the people who the sentence was carried out been convulsing, throwing up, having real reactions to it, being in apparently insignificant pain through the process. And people who were there and observed it at the time, many of them come out very traumatized.
Absolutely.
As a result of witnessing that. The most recent execution, and I forget the individual's name.
It was a couple of weeks ago.
Was a couple of weeks ago, but went through that same thing, right? And I think that's where the Pardon and Parole Board coming out on Wednesday saying they just recommended commuting another death sentence and mentioned the fact that we still seem to have problems.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So the Bigler, I can't remember his last name. It starts with an S. But he is scheduled to be put to death on December 9th. But on Wednesday, during an extremely intense and very lengthy Pardon and Parole Board meeting, and remember, 3 of these appointees are Governor Stitt appointees, they voted overwhelmingly to grant him clemency, to not execute him. Although, and they were very plain about it in their conversation, they absolutely believe that this man is guilty of the murder that he's been convicted of. However, they do not trust the state's ability to carry out these executions properly at this point. And that's a heck of a statement for your pardon and parole board to
Right.
say.
That's
right?
exactly right.
And I get the feeling that going forward they're going to continue to grant clemency until we work out our
they work
issues.
that out, or we decide, you know what, we're going to do something else.
Exactly.
Right?
So really interesting stuff.
And I think you're right. I think there is a tendency amongst younger voters, especially, to think maybe it's the death penalty has outlived its usefulness, whatever that might have been perceived. I know my own position has changed on this over time.
Sure.
There were, 30 years ago, coming out of high school, early in college, you hear the arguments, well, I don't want them living off of the taxpayers but it's actually cheaper than going through the death sentence process because of all of the appeals and everything that has to be involved, so you're not really saving any money. We don't see it as being an actual deterrent to crime in enforcing it.
No.
So many of the arguments that have been used to promote using the death penalty, as social scientists, when we research these, we find that those arguments don't really hold up to reality. And so while I philosophically can say, I think I can imagine a crime committed that is so heinous that I might imagine someone forfeiting their life by committing that crime.
Right.
I also think we've got a problem. And we've got a problem on two ends, right? We know there are all sorts of problems with the justice system and people. We have people who are not guilty pleading guilty because they've been intimidated by law enforcement. We have people being convicted and sentenced to death who 20 years later, thankfully we do have a lengthy process to carry this out. 20 years later, they're getting released because we have now new evidence that shows they didn't commit the crime.
Did you see Malcolm X's?
Yes.
Released after 30 years in prison.
I saw that yesterday. That's
Crazy.
right. And so when we know we have these problems, we should be ultra cautious. And I would say in Oklahoma, we should just say, you know what, we are going to pull back, and until we rectify these problems on the front end and the back end of this process, we're going to stay any executions. We're just not going to do it. Right?
I agree. I was in 2014. I was studying at the University of Amsterdam that summer whenever that botched execution happened, and again, it was international news. The entire cohort, and these were people from all different countries. All we did was talk about that Oklahoma that day, and I was so just okay, cool. Yeah, that's where I'm from.
Yeah, exactly. And listen. Whether you are pro-death penalty or not, you should have problems with a process that sends, maybe not the majority of the time, but certainly more regularly than should happen, innocent people to the death chamber, right? You should have a problem with that for sure, and you should have a problem with any process that that doesn't do this in a way that we can at least say we did this in the most humane, and I hate using that word. I'm not sure that's an appropriate word, but in the most humane way possible, right? The death penalty is not designed for vengeance. It's not designed for retribution.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not. That's what it's about, right? And it should not be. And we should be concerned about it when we have these kind of things going on. One of the things I did want to bring up, you mentioned it when you talked about his pardon or his commutation, whatever we're going to call it, is he put some conditions on it, right?
Yes.
And so he said that he's going to commute this to life in prison without the possibility of parole, conditioned upon he will never, ever be able to seek a pardon or any other clemency items from here on
relief,
out, right? And so the question, immediately came up for those of us who study government is, does the governor have the power to do that?
Right. Where is this in writing?
Right. And so I wanted to pull a couple of things from the Oklahoma Constitution, right?
Yes.
That's where we want to start with. The governor does have, the Constitution is very clear, Article 6, Section 10. The governor has the power to grant pardons and paroles and commutations after a recommendation by the Pardon and Parole Board, right?
Right.
And can do so upon such conditions and with such restrictions and limitations as the governor may deem proper. So we're going to start with that. So this seems to give the governor some discretion on what kind of conditions to put on this, right? subject to such regulations as may be prescribed by law, and by prescribed by law, that would also include the Constitution. And so the question goes, does the power of the governor extend to binding future governors or future pardon and parole boards from examining new evidence and saying, you know what, this person deserves a pardon because they didn't commit the crime? Because it appears to me that that's what the governor is trying to do. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Absolutely, and I think that was kind of, as we talked about a little bit earlier, a piece of red meat for the folks who were going to be absolutely devastated or up in arms that he granted this man clemency, right?
And there were some, the Attorney General came out with a statement just kind of saying, well, I know the governor thinks he's doing what's right, but he's wrong, you know.
I've never, side note here, I've never seen a governor's cabinet be so anti-him. I've not ever witnessed this in Oklahoma history.
He can't win for losing.
I really can't.
As we have both noted before, much of that has been brought on by himself.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Anyway,
so,
sorry.
Just a side note, but you're exactly right. It does say also that the governor can't grant a parole if someone has been sentenced to death. Or life in prison. Now, a parole is not the same thing as a pardon, right? So, so there's what it looks like is the governor has made this a situation where, if a future pardon parole board says yes, indeed, this prisoner deserves a pardon, we find based on this evidence they did not commit the crime. That could be tied up in courts. If any district attorney or any future attorney general wants to challenge it, by putting that provision in there, the governor is assured that they would be able to.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And it does give you a feel that the governor's kind of trying to play both sides. Like that appease two competing sides by this. So
it's been very interesting to watch the reactions, right? So you have the ultra-right folks on Twitter like Jack Prelisek, right? Very, very funny stuff. I retweeted him yesterday because he accused it of capitulating to Kim Kardashian, of all people, right? You know, he's just pleasing the celebrity folks.
So did Trump. Didn't she came up and visited Trump and he issued the pardon, right? So,
absolutely. It's hysterical.
She's got clout, apparently.
She does. Quite a bit of it. Very interesting.
But yes, so you got those on the right. After the initial relief that he issued the pardon or the commutation, you then begin to see criticism from the left that now he put all these conditions on it too, right? So in trying to walk that middle line, he may have just assured that he's going to get arrows from both sides. So not much support on either.
I don't know that this was the most politically expedient plan for him.
Yeah,
to be honest,
it doesn't seem like it. Now, I want to talk about something else just as we wrap up here. Right? So we're coming up on Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And I want to mention a couple of things that I'm thankful for. And before I do that, I also want to give a shout out to the Oklahoma Council for Economics Education. They held an event about a week ago called Economics by the Pint. It was a wonderful event. I can't imagine a whole lot more fun than talking economics and drinking beer. And so we got to do that. Dr. Travis Roach, the chair of the econ department at UCO, was there. We had played a trivia game. Lots of fun.
Oh, cool.
It's a great organization that promotes economics education in common education primarily, right? So they promote K through 12 economics education. Really good organization. The money goes to help support their programs for that event. And I got this great T-shirt.
I was going to say, representing.
So I wanted to shout out to both Dr. Roach, to Amy Miller, who runs the organization, for what they did. And if they do one again, you should absolutely attend. You'll have some fun.
Excellent.
But beyond that, I want to say some things that I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for a great partner on this podcast, and not just on this podcast, but someone who work would never be the same if she wasn't around. And so
thank you.
I am very thankful to have you around.
I am. I agree. I concur. I also should mention that I'm very proud and thankful for the now OPSA Professor of the Year award recipient, second time award recipient of this particular one. You make coming to work, you make doing all of this extra colloquiums and panels and the podcast and all of this stuff a joy. This is, it's fabulous. We get paid to do this stuff, and it's,
I know. Can you believe that?
Crazy.
Right? That's wonderful.
It's absolutely insane.
So thank you for making the work environment a better place, to be a much better place than it would be otherwise.
Ditto, sir. Ditto.
I want to say thank you to our editor / producer / all of this stuff, Jamie, who you don't ever see him. He's always behind the camera, but he gets this thing out to you, and so. We're very appreciative for that.
Amen.
And the hard work that he's done. We had at one time a huge production crew, and now he does all of that because of the COVID pandemic and all of that. So he's done a great job. Want to say thank you to you guys, the people who watch this, to our students who, without you, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, totally.
So thanks for sticking with us and paying attention to what we say and giving us a hard time when you don't like what we say. I like that too. So.
Same.
All of that. I'm speaking to you, Duran. You know who you are. But there's lots to be thankful. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. It's things that can get us down. But I want you to. We have a lot to be thankful for.
Yes, sir.
And I just wanted to express that as we wrap up.
We love you.
All right. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time right here on Not My Generation. If you want to contact us, give us an idea, suggestion, complaint, comment, you can reach us at
notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
We'll see you next time.